Hi friends, Mrs. Matway here to talk to you about how to write arguments to support a thesis statement. Many of you have thesis statements that are proficient or you're very close and approaching proficiency and you're ready to really start thinking about what your arguments are going to be to support your thesis statement. It's really important that throughout this process, while you're writing your arguments, you have your annotated sources with you, because your arguments are going to develop from your readings that you have already done. So I think the first important question to ask is, what exactly are arguments? Well, arguments are a set of reasons given to convince others that your idea, in this case your thesis, is right. So when you write arguments, you want to ask yourself a few questions that will really help you create these set of reasons to really convince somebody else that your idea is correct. The first question is you want to ask yourself, what are two reasons why? And you're going to fill in that blank with your thesis statement. So what are two reasons why? And then fill in the blank with your thesis. After you've developed these two reasons, you might want to ask yourself this question: are these two reasons based on what I have already read? Really, you should be thinking about what are those common ideas that came up in the articles that I read or came up in the conversation I was having with other people that had my topic. Those common ideas are going to probably be an argument that you will use to support your thesis. And the last question you should ask yourself after you've developed your argument is, can I discuss these two reasons in detail? And this is the idea that you don't want to make your arguments too specific. And you'll see an example of that in the next slide. So, let's see what this looks like. Let's say that this is my thesis statement. Mrs. Matway is the absolute best teacher at Sedgwick Middle School. So the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, what are two reasons why? I'm going to fill it in with my thesis statement. What are two reasons why Mrs. Matway is the absolute best teacher at Sedgwick Middle School? My two reasons that I come up with are going to be my arguments. So let's see what I came up with. I have my first argument here, and it says, my first reason why Mrs. Matway is the absolute best teacher at Sedgwick Middle School is she jumps on desks. So I want you to think about that argument for a second. Is that a well-written argument? And you should really be asking yourself two questions. Is it based on what I've already read? Those common ideas? And is it something I can talk about in detail? Think about that for about 10 seconds. If you said that you thought it was too specific, you're right. This argument is way too specific. I would not be able to talk about this in a lot of detail. I mean, really, that's all there is to say. So you have to think about trying to make it general. Well, if I made this my argument, she's very enthusiastic about teachers, I could then talk about one way she's really enthusiastic is that she jumps on desks. And that's what makes her the absolute best teacher. So my argument would be very general. She is very enthusiastic about teacher, and I might use this idea of jumping on desks within that paragraph to support this argument. Let's look at my second argument. What is it? She doesn't get mad at her students when they don't do their homework. All right, so let's think about those questions. Is it based on the common ideas I've read about? Is it something I could talk about in detail? Take 10 seconds and see what you think. All right, if you said it was too specific again, you're right. It is way too specific. I cannot talk about that in detail. It's just one idea. I can't go on and on and on about how that makes Mrs. Matway the best teacher. But what if I made it a little bit more general and I said she understands her students? And one way she understands her students is that she doesn't get mad at them when they don't do their homework. So this would be my argument. She understands her students, and I can actually use this idea as a detail in my paragraph to support it. So this all makes sense probably with this thesis statement because it's a very general thesis statement and a great one at that. But what about when it comes to environmental topics? How does this really work? So I have an example here for you. Coffee companies need to use more earth-friendly methods of growing coffee beans to preserve the earth. So the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, what is one reason why coffee companies need to use more earth-friendly methods of growing coffee beans to preserve the earth? So what is one reason why? What is one reason why? Well, I remember reading a lot about how animals' habitats were being destroyed in the Amazon because of coffee companies growing beans. They need a lot of land and they chop down all the trees, and then the animals are losing their food and they're losing their habitats. Oh my gosh. I can maybe say, as my first argument, animals play an important role in the forest. Growing coffee beans destroys the animals and their habitats. One, it's based on something I've read a lot about, and I remember hearing a lot of my group members talking about this. And also, it's not too specific. I can talk a lot. I could talk about many different animals. I could talk about different ways that the habitats are being destroyed and how these animals are affected, all because they're growing coffee beans in the rainforest. Great. So let's look at my second argument. Well, I remember reading a lot about how the rainforest is really important because trees soak up carbon dioxide. But I also remember reading a lot about how the coffee companies use this method called slashing and burning to destroy the rainforest. Now, if they're burning and chopping down the trees, they're adding a lot of carbon dioxide to the air. And oh my goodness, that will add to global warming and will really hurt the earth. So my second argument is going to be coffee companies often use slash and burn farming. Slash and burn increases global warming. All right, it's based on something I read. I could talk a whole lot about the different ways that, it increases global warming and how the global warming is going to affect the earth and how it'll basically increase climate change and how there'll be more extreme weather and how it'll affect, even beyond and going to the Arctic, and then the polar bears are affected. Oh my gosh, I could talk about really everything and anything with this second argument. And it's all based on stuff that I've read. So that's basically the whole explanation of writing arguments. Just to go back and to have you guys remember that when you are writing arguments, you really need to ask yourself these three questions. The first most important question is, what are two reasons why? And you fill in that blank with your thesis statement. And then you got to ask yourself, are these two reasons based on what I've already read? If you read it in a caption of a picture, and that's the only place you've read it, it's probably not a really good idea to put down as an argument. And can I discuss these two reasons in detail? You have to make sure it's not too specific. You can't write down a statistic, 99% of blah, 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 or 1 in 8 children, da, 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 da. You have to make sure that it's something you can talk about in a lot of detail. So it's got to be a general statement, not a very specific statement. So go ahead and give it a try. And if you have any further questions, I can obviously answer them tomorrow in class, and I'll give you some feedback also about how your two arguments are. So good luck and have fun.